Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, December 19th. Oh, my goodness. And this is our last webinar of 2025, and we're going to be talking about battery energy storage system ordinances. And I'm excited for this group to be here to round out our 2025 schedule. For any technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the Q&A box and I'll do my best to answer those. For technical questions related to the presentation, again, type those in the Q&A box and we will get to those at the end of the presentation during our live Q&A portion. Coming up on your screen is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2025. Thanks to all those participating members for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today, we're sponsored by County Planning Division. So thank you for joining us and bringing us another wonderful webcast. Coming up on your screen is our next two sessions. We're actually booking into March already. I can't believe it. Everyone is just hitting the ground running for 2026 already. So we do have several webinars available for you to register for. Just head over to ohioplanning.org/planning webcast, and you can register for all of our upcoming sessions. Today's session is worth 1.5 CM credits, and you can potentially log those credits with APA's system upgrades. It's a little fickle right now, but generally speaking, you can log into your My APA account and search under the CM logs by either today's event number or title, both of which can be found on our website. This just came from leadership at National. If you are having trouble logging those CM credits, if you're having trouble logging into your My APA account, do not fret. Your grace period, they're extending it to May 31st, 2026. So if you're unable to log credits or you're waiting for something to get logged so that you can log it, whatever the case may be, APA understands that there's a lot of glitchiness that they're working through with a huge update like this. It's bound to happen. So just be patient. If you have any immediate issues, you can contact aicpcm@planning.org. Don't contact me because I don't know anything about that stuff other than to tell you that it's okay. And that eventually you will be able to log all of those credits and there is a grace period for you. If you're on social media, be sure to like us on Facebook. That's where I post any important date or time changes, when new sessions are available for you to register for, and a weekly reminder of what's on tap for Friday. We record all of our sessions and we post them onto our YouTube channel. So just type in youtube.com/planning webcast. Will pop up along with our well over 500 session recordings, all available to you for free. So be sure to subscribe to our channel so that you get a notification when a new recording has been uploaded. We also have an email list now. This was new for 2025. You can scan the QR code or again, just visit our website, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast, and you can subscribe to our mailing list. I send exactly one email a month at the top of each month. I promise it is only 1 month. And no, I don't sell your emails to anyone. This is just me helping to remind you of what sessions are available and what on-demand sessions are also available for you. So that is the end of my housekeeping items. Again, if you have questions for our panelists, type them in the Q&A box. We'll get to those at the end during our Q&A. Also, stay close to your devices because we do have some polling questions scattered throughout today's presentation. If you are on certain types of tablets or mobile devices that disable pop-ups, you may or may not see our polling questions. But for the majority of you, you should see them pop up when the time is right. Okay, that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to you, Adam, with the County Planning Division to kind of kick things off.
Thank you, Christine. As always, great introduction. We really appreciate APA Ohio for allowing us to put on these fantastic webinars. For those of you who may be joining us the first time in terms of county planning hosting a webinar, this is our third for the year. My name is Adam Bradford. I'm the chair executive of the County Planning Division, and uh, we have a really fantastic webinar coming up. If you attended our previous ones, we were talking about AI, and we've made a shift. Also, I think I talked about the opportunity of this being a sustainability credit. I've seen that on APA's website. So even though it wasn't shown, you can also log that in for CM credits. So I just wanted to pass that up. Thank you, Christine. So without further ado, I'm going to switch it over now to allow Alan and Eric to introduce themselves. Just real quick, Alan is our secretary uh, coming in for 2026 for the County Planning Division.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Hi, everybody, and happy holidays. Alan Calder here, planning manager of Solano County, and I'm joined by my colleague, Associate Planner Eric Hagstrom. We're very pleased to be able to present this case study of our BESS ordinance, battery energy storage systems, to you. And I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy holiday schedules to join us. I want to give a big shout out to the county planning division, APA County Planning Division, and Ohio Planning. Thank you very much for this opportunity. We're really excited to talk to you a little bit more about Solano County and our efforts to adopt this BESS ordinance. A little bit about Solano County, briefly, before I turn it over to Eric Hagstrom here for the bulk of the presentation. But, Solano County is a very interesting location. We're about 45 miles from Sacramento and about 45 miles from San Francisco. But we're largely an ag county. We have about 900 square miles. 675 square miles of it is actually rural and farmlands. So we really occupy a really unique area inside of two major metropolitan planning areas. We're one of California's original 27 counties, founded and incorporated in 1850. So a long history and legacy in San Francisco Bay Area, Sacramento planning area. And we're thrilled to be home to Travis Air Force Base, which is actually a major part of our local economic economy. They're the largest employer in the county, and their importance to national defense and the local economy is very well documented. We're really proud to be home to Travis, and maintaining their future viability and economic as a economic resource and national defense installation is of utmost importance to us here in the county. So we're a very diverse county, very old county, and we were presented with a very challenging new technical subject area of battery energy storage systems. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Eric Hagstrom to tell you a little bit more about how we went about adopting this ordinance of very technical information and really going through a pretty steep learning curve in doing so. And I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about myself also. I've got 35 years in the public and private sectors, with 6 years, last year's at being at Solano County, where I managed 12 staff, Eric being one of them. Local and international design experience and planning experience, having worked in Gabon, Libreville, Gabon, Africa for 3.5 years of note, which was quite an interesting part of my career that I didn't see coming, but I look on very fondly. So it was a very interesting experience. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric Hagstrom for the bulk of the presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. Yeah, so to provide a little bit of about why we ran into this issue and why we're seeing the rise of both battery energy storage being developed, as well as the community concerns related to these systems. The primary reason is the risk of thermal runaway fire at these facilities. We've seen multiple incidents nationwide. here in California, where we've seen some fires at, in particular, Moss Landing. I should note that that was an older system where a bunch of batteries were all inside of one building. Those types of systems are not really built anymore. They're considered a past generation, but it was really because all those different batteries were in one building, the scale of that fire. So community members obviously seeing incidents like that are perturbed and scared about the risk of these systems, particularly if they're built in their communities, given the shelter-in-place orders and potential health impacts that we're seeing as the fallout to these fire systems. For a lot of jurisdictions, this is really, a new technology. They haven't seen these systems built in the past. And like a lot of other jurisdictions, we were kind of caught off guard with not a lot of regulations designed to address the specific risks that these systems pose to our communities. So before we dive into some of the content, I want to provide some background on what exactly it is we're talking about when we mention different aspects in the battery energy storage space. One in particular is front of the meter versus behind the meter. Sorry, having troubles with my mute button going on and off here. But you may be familiar with homes and businesses installing individual batteries behind the meter. So on the customer side of the meter, we don't necessarily, we are not necessarily regulating those behind the meter systems in our ordinance, although they do still have a risk of thermal runaway. It's really those big front of the meter systems that are serving the entire grid that we are regulating under our ordinance here. Now, it is really the risk of thermal runaway that poses a particular with these systems. And it's really the self-reinforcing, uncontrollable release of energy that is being stored by those batteries in a way it's not supposed to be released. So it comes out in the form of a fire, releasing lots of heat and so to provide a little bit more background on what the regulatory framework is here in California.
Hey, Eric, I'm sorry. I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. It's going in, your audio is going in and out. I know we tested it earlier and it seemed to be working a little bit better. But I am going to make a suggestion that if you have a cell phone by you, would you be able to call in? You'll still have your screen, but just mute yourself on the webinar end of it, and use a telephone to call in. And is that, do you have that available for you?
In the meantime, Alan, do you want to talk about this state regulatory context that we're facing and how that frames our
Sure thing. Yeah, sure thing, Eric. So thanks for that. With regards to the California regulatory framework, it's unique to California. We've got two pretty interesting bills that have been passed recently that affect battery energy storage specifically in California. So AB 205 is for BESS projects over 200 megawatts. And what happens here is very interesting is they have those projects have the ability to bypass local regulations, which is pretty interesting for us. And it was a learning curve to go through. So what happens is those projects can be permitted by the state, bypassing local regulations. So that was a real eye opener for us in this process. We do have one application that actually chose to go that route, and that we are currently observing the processing or the permitting of that project in the county right now as it is. The other is SB 283, which is an emergency plan required to be approved by local first responders. So that's really a great opportunity to ensure that these emergency plans are submitted for these projects, and then it is a requirement of California state law. And then the other is, California Fire Code is really pretty up to snuff on standards, national standards, and so they do require compliance with NFPA 855 and the underwriters 9540 standards. And so those are really key code compliance regulatory frameworks that play a major part in the BESS permitting in the state of California. All right. And obviously, there's a growing demand for energy storage throughout the state. There's clean energy goals, demanding 100% clean energy on the grid by 2045. So there's significant demand from the state to approve these projects, thus the ability to bypass local regulations with regards to AB 205. And then the front of the meter BESS facilities, they store grid energy and discharge that energy during peak demand. So it's really quite important to balance out the energy needs inside these systems for the state of California. They do improve grid reliability and efficiency while stabilizing power rates. And they do provide outsized property tax benefits due to the immense investment required, mostly through sales and property tax. Ideally, there's point of sale within the county so that those products are bought within the county so that the county can achieve the sales tax benefit from that. Okay, next slide, Eric. Thank you. And so this is the timeline of the project to date. In June 2023, we received a major BESS application. It's on the Ag 40 zone district. In December of 23, we realized through the board and discussions internally that we did need to prepare a moratorium on those projects so that we could prep accordingly. The board did so through the January and February timeframe. In August of 2025, once we got a little closer on the moratorium, we understood that we could lift a portion of that moratorium in the manufacturing and industrial zones. So that gave us an opportunity to give some relief to some of the projects that may have been proposed to come online in those particular zone districts. And then in November 2025, we were able to achieve the full ordinance adoption through the board. And so roughly a 2-year process basically is what it took us to get to the point of adopting this BESS ordinance. Okay.
Hey, Alan.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
I'm
Sorry,
sorry.
looks like I'm still getting some feedback. One more sec.
Okay, that sounded pretty good, actually.
While we wait and he's making some other adjustments, why don't we go ahead and just jump into a couple polls while we're waiting for him to figure out sound and things like that. Is that okay, Eric, or do you think you have your audio ready?
Yeah, I think one more minute would be okay.
Sure. Maybe we do the first Mentimeter.
Okay. All right, folks, it is up on your screen now. And it is what's your professional role? Let's see who's on the line. Are you a county planner, city planner, with a regional planning organization, consultant, developer, academics, other? Let's see who's here. We'll give it another moment here. And Eric, it looks like your audio is muted, but
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, it sounds good.
yeah.
Awesome.
Except I'm muting it keeps unmuting now.
Yeah.
Your webinar sound keeps
How
unmuting.
convenient.
I know, and then it makes buffering. So if you need me to just pull up slides for you so that you can just be on audio, I'm happy to do that.
I think that might be best.
Okay, we're going to do that. So, oh, good. We got about 75% of folks here. I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So a lot of consultants on the line. I guess that makes sense. And then we also have some city, county, and regional. So we have a really great mix of folks here. So that's great. Why don't I just go ahead and launch question 2 because it's somewhat related. And that's what region do you work in? And I kind of broke it down how I normally break it down. So gauge based on what you think is within your realm there. And while we're doing that, I'll go ahead and pull up the slides.
Yeah, and Alan, if you want, can you just give just a general background on what battery energy saving systems are? You know, why now?
Yeah, well, it really comes down to the grid, energy in the grid, and the need for balancing the loads in the grid. State of California sees that there's a high demand on the grid. We've had rolling brownouts here in California for years. That seems to equalize the system. The ability to have better energy storage at a kind of a grid level scale. That's been a major impact of these systems coming online. So, oh, looks like we got some results there. That's terrific.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot from Midwest, Northeast. Yeah, it's just a really great mix of folks. And I say this all the time when folks are coming onto our webinar series. It really is, we have planners and adjacents from coast to coast. So it's a great mix. And you should be able to see my screen now. And
Yes.
I don't know if this is the slide that we're on, but here I am, and I can forward through if I need to. Just tell
Totally.
me next slide.
Next slide. Thank you, Christine.
Okay, of course.
Thanks for everybody for hanging with us through the technical difficulties here. So to kind of frame up, kind of what this process did and where we started and where we got to, before we adopted this ordinance, we considered battery energy storage systems to be utility infrastructure outside the right-of-way, with no specific development standards that address the risks of thermal runaway and how that might impact our communities. And through this ordinance development process, we've developed a relatively common sense ordinance that addresses a lot of these risks and protects our local communities from the risks of thermal runaway, and includes restrictions on locations, as well as the types of systems that can be deployed in various areas. Next slide, please, Christine. So as Alan mentioned, this has been a very, very long process of getting all of these regulations developed that has required some pretty intense community engagement. Since this topic was introduced to our board, our community members have come up and spoken consistently and raised their voices and their concerns related to these systems at those board meetings. And then we held a consolidated public workshop where we had members of the public come and voice their concerns with these systems. And some of our main takeaways from that public engagement were that the public not necessarily opposed these systems as a whole, but more so they wanted to see safer systems without a risk of thermal runaway, and they understood the general need, but they wanted to see it implemented in a smart way with not our community being a guinea pig for these new technologies. There was also concerns about proximity to homes, to schools, to hospitals, and in particular proximity to Travis Air Force Base. So really trying to understand what exactly it would mean for all those various sites if there was a thermal runaway incident and a plume, impacted those nearby sites. There was also kind of a request for revenue sharing and local benefit. Ultimately, these projects are serving the entire grid. And so there was a lot of community members that wanted to ensure that just because these were being built in Solano County, that Solano County received some of the local benefit. There was also concern around protecting taxpayers and making sure that taxpayers didn't bear the bill of any thermal runaway incident and the cleanup afterwards. And so really making sure there was some strong financial protections. And then how this type of ordinance and process can push developers to incentivize and adopt those safer battery energy storage technologies without a risk of thermal runaway. So in order to inform the ordinance development process, county staff didn't necessarily have the expertise to really address all of these emerging technologies and emerging issues. So we assembled a technical working group representing local stakeholders and experts and the industry. And then we brought together those stakeholders for a monthly meeting where we invited experts in various fields to come and speak to that group. We had experts from the National Fire Protection Association, Underwriters Laboratories, folks that were former fire chiefs that had been involved with permitting these systems, even experts in doing actual plume modeling itself come and speak to that group. that those discussions were oftentimes lively with various stakeholders representing various perspectives. And one thing we learned relatively quickly was that it was best not to try to seek consensus in those meetings, but rather try to parse out as many perspectives and as much information as possible for county staff to then have the discretion of trying to find a balanced path between those different perspectives. Next slide, please, Christine. So in that technical working group, we tried to really make sure to have lots of various local stakeholders represented. So we had our assistant agricultural commissioner representing the local ag community. That was one very vocal community that we heard from. We also had our emergency services manager representing consolidated first responders. And she was very, very helpful in coordinating feedback from first responders, bringing first responders into meetings. And we were actually able to set up one consolidated meeting inviting all first responding agencies in the county to come discuss the topic of battery energy storage, discuss their needs, what they would need to respond to these incidents, a thermal runaway incident. So all of that input helped inform our ordinance here. We also had a community member who lives right nearby where some of these systems are being proposed to being built. She has helped kind of rally her community around pushback against these systems with a risk of thermal runaway, and was important to have that perspective represented, and ultimately was one of the most valuable members of the team, doing lots of research on our behalf and pulling up lots of information. We also had a fire chief representative representing the first responders that would be responding directly to a thermal runaway incident. We also had the executive director of the California Energy Storage Alliance representing the industry. And then we also had county staff from our hazardous materials section representing the team that would be cleaning up after a thermal runaway response. Next slide, please. So through that discussion and that long process of pulling together all the different perspectives, we were able to put together our final ordinance. And I guess before I dive into some of the details of what we made sure to include in that, I'd first off like to thank the entire county team that really helped put this together. That include representatives from our county administrator's office, from our county council's office, leadership within the Department of Resource Management, and of course the support and resources given to us by our Board of Supervisors. So what ended up making it into the final ordinance was restricting these systems to specific zoning districts. So that was just manufacturing and industrial zoning districts, as well as one specific type of commercial district intended for commercial services serving offsite uses like batteries do. And then ultimately, we prohibited these systems in any kind of agricultural, residential, resource conservation, or parked zoning districts. And that was a point of debate whether or not these systems should be allowed in agricultural districts, which we ultimately decided not to. Next slide, please. So ultimately, these systems would be subject to a separate piece of regulation that we have in terms of conserving our agricultural land here in Solano County. In 2025, we adopted an agricultural land mitigation policy that requires projects that convert farmland to conserve additional farmland at either a 1 to 1.5 or a 1 to 3 mitigation ratio, with that 1.3 mitigation ratio being required for conversion of prime farmland, unique farmland, or farmland of statewide importance. So there's ultimately 3 paths to compliance under that ordinance. So you can either conserve land within the same agricultural district. If that's not available, conserving farmland within the county. And then if that's also not possible, paying a fee in lieu. So if BESS projects are trying to develop on farmland, as we've seen projects proposed here in the county, they would be subject to that process. Next slide, please. So ultimately, the way we narrowed down the site selection process was starting with a relatively wide net. So you can see here all of the different parcels in Solano County that are zoned under ag zoning, manufacturing zoning, and industrial zoning. Includes a good chunk of the eastern half of the county. From there, next slide, please, we eliminated some of the fire hazard severity zones. So those are zones determined by the state to have higher risks of wildfire. So we did not allow systems to be built in any very high fire hazard zones. And then we restricted the high fire hazard zones in the commercial zoning districts. So next slide, please. That allowed us to narrow it down to even fewer parcels. We then looked at which parcels had any special farmland, so prime farmland, unique farmland, or farmland of statewide importance. We did not allow it on those parcels. Next slide, please. So that narrowed us even further down to just specific parcels, but this still included those ag zoning parcels, which still allowed these facilities to be built on ag zoning districts. Next slide, please. Ultimately, we decided against including those ag zoning districts, leaving us only with the manufacturing, industrial, and commercial services districts that are outside of those fire hazard severity zones. So you can see those areas highlighted in green, so really not a lot of the county here, and in pre-designated manufacturing and industrial districts with adequate setbacks and general plan preparations for that type of facility. Next slide, please. So one of the main things that we heard from our community was the desire to incentivize systems without a risk of thermal runaway, safer systems. And so we decided to create ultimately two pathways for permit approval under our ordinance based on whether or not a system has a risk of thermal runaway. And this is ultimately a binary decision. We don't recognize lower risk systems. It either has a risk or it doesn't have a risk. And that is determined through a third-party risk assessment that is then analyzed by county staff. If a system does have a risk of thermal runaway, like these lithium-ion systems that we're seeing deployed most frequently, then there are enhanced requirements specifically related to that risk of thermal runaway. And then if it doesn't have a risk of thermal runaway, we've reduced some of the requirements, including reduced setbacks, lower mitigation requirements, and less technical analysis required to approve those systems. So just a quick illustrative list of what those non-risk systems might be, and this does not represent a final determination by the county, but rather for illustrative purposes. So those are things like iron air batteries, flow batteries, compressed air storage, liquid air energy storage, or aluminum iron batteries. Next slide, please. So a big chunk of our ordinance was designed to mitigate potential impacts from thermal runaway and to impose some safety standards on these systems to minimize that risk. This was ultimately a large point of discussion in the development of this ordinance is how do we ensure that as these systems are being built in the county, that some of the benefits go back to the local agencies and communities that are hosting these systems. And ultimately, we determined that it was most advantageous for the county not to enter a community benefit agreement or a host community agreement, as some other jurisdictions have with these types of developments, but rather require specific impacts be mitigated through certain payments and deals. So that includes the developers paying for all the necessary response equipment. So if that's new trucks for the fire department or new radios to be able to respond to those systems, the developer pays for those. We also require that the developer provide any required training to be able to respond to one of these thermal runaway incidents at the request of any first responding agency, both within and without the county, so including those mutual benefit agreements. Some specific requirements that we heard from our first responder community was the need for radio interoperability and a consolidated dispatch system. Those are both requirements in order to muster up all the various agencies that might be required to respond to a thermal runaway incident. So those are very expensive systems that a developer would be paying for in order to mitigate that risk. And then additionally, because of the importance of Travis Air Force Base in Solano County and the potential impacts a plume might have to the missions and flight paths of Travis Air Force Base, we also require that the plume analysis specifically address impacts to Travis Air Force Base. Next slide, please. So we also created ultimately two setback requirement pathways for those systems, once again, based on the determination whether or not the system has a risk of thermal runaway. So for the systems that do have a risk of thermal runaway, we require a 300-foot setback from any existing sensitive receptors. So this means any existing homes, schools, nearby businesses that might have someone that is immunocompromised in that building. And that's only from existing sensitive receptors. And then we require a 100-foot setback from the front property line. That was developed in consultation with our first responder community that said that that was enough space to be able to operate safely from the public right-of-way. Then we also require a 50-foot rear setback from the rear and side property lines. And then ultimately within those setback distances, we require a 30-foot wide fire access road that encircles all the modules with two separate gate access points so that fire trucks can drive as close as they need to a BESS module if it catches on fire. And then we created a relatively simple pathway for the systems without a risk of thermal runaway. That's just a 20-foot setback from all property lines, which is still ultimately more stringent than the state requirements, which could be as low as just a 10-foot setback from any property line. Next slide, please. So this kind of brings us to the end of life and preparing for the end of life of these systems. These systems usually have an estimated life of around 20 to 30 years, but we also anticipate that developers are going to want to kind of redevelop these systems, install newer, more energy-dense batteries as those become available. So we're requiring that developers notify the county when they're going to do the swapping out of those battery systems, and then ultimately preparing for the decommissioning and end of life of these systems. We require that 100% of the cost to refurbish the land and return it to its original state and usability be posted at the start of commercial operation. So that means either a bond or an insurance policy that covers not only the cost of removing equipment, but also the cost of cleanup if there is a thermal runaway incident. We're also requiring that manufacturers be responsible for the recovery and recycling of the battery cells themselves at the end of life so that those aren't ending up in our local landfills. Once again, we're requiring the land to be restored to its original state and usability. Which is of particular concern when these projects are proposing to convert agricultural lands. And then all of these projects are ultimately subject to California's environmental quality law called the California Environmental Quality Act, which requires any projects with environmental impacts to go through an analysis and study of those impacts and go through a public hearing process to engage the public and any stakeholders in mitigating those impacts. So that brings us to the end of the presentation and really the end of the main gist of our ordinance here. But on the next slide, we've also included a list of resources that we found particularly helpful in developing this ordinance. So we can send that as a follow-up here. We found those to be particularly helpful and also included the text of our own ordinance if you would like to take any inspiration from that. So I think we now have some survey questions, so I will turn it back over to the rest of the team for those.
Okay, let's dive into some of these survey questions and then we'll get to some of these other questions that are in the Q&A box that are lining up here. All right. Let me get to my polling questions. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch some more here. Okay, and the question is, has your jurisdiction received inquiries or applications for battery energy storage projects? So yes, we have adopted regulations, currently developing regulations. Yes, we have received inquiries, but no regulations yet. No inquiries or not sure. Give it another moment here. Okay. Oh, there's a lot of good questions coming in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this one and then share the results. So a lot of folks on the line are just sort of in fact-finding mission right now. Which is to be expected at this stage of this type of events. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch our next one. All right. There we go. All right, talking about the approximate population of your jurisdiction. So let's see a couple questions related to that and get some answers here. And they range from under 50,000 to over 500,000. Okay. Majority under 50,000, but then then almost the next largest is over 500,000. So again, we just kind of have a span of folks here on the line. That's great. And I'm just going to keep going through these questions till we hit the end. Is that correct? Yes, I'm assuming so.
Yes, we might as well go through those, Christine. That'd be
Okay.
great. Thank you.
How familiar were you with BESS regulations before this webinar? Yes, a lot of folks on fact-finding mission today. I love this for us.
And Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, Solano County, you guys have around 450,000 people?
Yeah, we're about 450,000 total. Interestingly, in the unincorporated area that we regulate, we're only about 18,500 people. So the majority of our county is urban, in urban areas. We have 7 jurisdictions inside the city, the county of Solano.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, you guys also, you're getting ready to grow significantly in the next few years, correct?
Possibly. We have many of you may be familiar with the California Forever project, that is in our county, with regards to the new community that a group of Silicon Valley investors are engaged with. That is actually in our county with the a annexation coming into play into the city of Suisun City, which is a smaller municipality of about 30,000 people. And the annexation ask is to incorporate an additional 20,000 acres or so, which would push the population from 30,000 in Suisun City to 430,000 people, which would effectively double the population of our county.
Oh my goodness. So finding other energy sources will be helpful across the board.
Yes.
We have another poll that we're just finishing up here, and that what stakeholder group do you believe would be most critical to engage early in the regulatory process? And fire department emergency responders came up. Is there a right or wrong answer to this question?
No, they were critical from the very start, obviously. They're on the front lines. Interestingly about these battery systems, what we come to learn is that they're not readily put out by fire, by water. That they can only dampen the land around the fire to prevent spread. And interesting, if you hit these lithium ion, chemical fires with water, it creates a cyanide cloud. They're incredibly toxic when they do go into thermal runaway for first responders. So it was absolutely vital and important that we talk with them right from the start. And
The-
and another cost to that, by the way, when we got into the weeds of it, when firefighters show up on a site, they wear something called turnouts. That heavy equipment that they wear, those are about $1,000 roughly per turnout. When they fight a fire that's a lithium ion fire, they need to dispose of those. They cannot be reused. And so that cost is borne, as you heard Eric say, by the applicant to compensate those fire departments for those costs.
Yeah, Alan, I was just going to ask, is that something that I'm assuming came up quite a bit at your public meetings, right? The whole,
Most definitely.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. And again, as Eric mentioned in the presentation, that folks in general aren't opposed to these systems. They're just opposed to how dangerous they can be,
Yeah.
if you will. So the safer the system, the more people are open to it, right? And the battery technology appears to be changing, is what we hear. It's not coming anytime soon, but it's in the works. And I do just want to emphasize one item before perhaps we get into questions here, but Travis Air Force Base is a vital part of our local economy, and the Moss Landing fire, although an older system, burned and had a plume for weeks on end. And with Travis's Air Force Base and their readiness, we could not afford to have that level of downtime, if you will, with regards to their operational readiness. So the plume analysis requirement was vital for us, and we do have 3 airports in our county. The idea of having downtime based on one of these systems and going into thermal runaway with regards to black plume in the sky was of utmost importance to us.
Yeah, and I guess another interesting piece of context that might be worth discussing. We didn't get into too many details on the presentation, but is our direct experience with the AB 205 opt-in process and what that's kind of looked like from the county side. That's once again that state law that allows large battery energy storage systems over 50 megawatts in nameplate capacity to get all of their permits from the California Energy Commission. Relatively new law that was the system used to be designed to permit like coal plants, natural gas plants, and nuclear power plants, and then was expanded in 2021 to allow renewable energy facilities to get their permits through the Energy Commission. So that we've got one project that has been deemed complete and is now working its way through the 270-day permit clock. And that's the Corby project being developed by NextEra Energy. That was the initial project that was first proposed to be permitted through the county that really kickstarted our ordinance development process. And ultimately, they turned to the state to receive their permits and are seeking all their permits through the state here. And under that legislation, it initially required that projects comply with local laws, ordinances, regulations, and standards. So that would have included our ordinance once adopted and would have required projects to comply with all of the elements of our ordinance or be deemed required for public convenience and necessity, which is a high legal bar for a project to surpass. But that law was later reformed and removed that requirement. So now projects only need to comply with state law and don't need to comply with local laws, ordinances, regulations, and standards. So at this point, the county's position is pretty much purely in a commentary position where we're commenting on any documents, any draft environmental impact reports that are being released by the project team. And then we are informing them of our local requirements, but it is ultimately at the California Energy Commission's discretion what local laws, ordinances, regulations, and standards and subcomponents they'll require the project to comply with here. So we've also seen one more project have what's called a pre-filing meeting that included the county and the city of Vacaville, one of the cities in our county. They are proposing to build another 157 megawatt system right nearby the initially proposed 300 megawatt system. So two large batteries being clustered in a relatively close area that's right around the large substation in our county. So if that informs any of your own processes, these developers are likely to develop in the flat land near the large existing substation so they can connect into that large substation. That's what we've seen in our county. And yeah, we are working our way through that process now, but I know that there's a couple of other states, if I'm correct, it's like Michigan and Massachusetts that have similar laws that allow permits to be issued by the state rather than by the local government.
Great. Let's dive into some questions here. And if our panelists could hold off typing any answers just so that my screen doesn't jump around, I would appreciate it. There are several questions related to the type of permit in the ordinances. And is it always required to have a special or conditional use? Are there by right permits available? Like what? There's confusion about if it's specifically just a special use or conditional use permit in
Yes,
the allowable districts.
Yes, thank you for the questions. Yes, a use permit would be required in all cases. That we would not have a pathway for a allowed by right use for these facilities.
Okay. Next question is, what is, in this case, the definition of prime farmland in Solano County's case?
Yeah, so we've got some state maps that indicate farmlands that are prime and non-prime, basically. Your prime farmlands are where you're going to see your row crops or high level of food production. Your non-prime is more grazing lands, non-irrigated lands, but we do defer to state designations, and we do have a very accurate database, GIS database of where those lands are. So on occasion, you might see, for instance, a 40-acre parcel might have a variety of land use types on it or soil types on it that might constitute the difference between prime and non-prime. We would take an average of that parcel as to what the majority of the site is in, and then make that determination whether it's prime or non-prime based on that.
Okay. Next question. I'm kind of combining questions together there. Does the local ordinance permitted zoning apply to a project going through the state permitting pathway? And does the state process preempt local siting preferences? And I guess it also kind of just depends on how your state works with that and,
Sure.
preempt laws.
Thank you, Christine, and Eric can add in after I take a shot at this one. We have one application that's in now. It's actually proposed on ag land. Our ordinance does not allow facilities on ag lands, but the state is preempting that site selection criteria to permit this project through the state on ag lands. So yes, the state regs will preempt our local guidance on site selection and permitting.
Thank you.
Yeah, and ultimately, yeah, it's at the California Energy Commission, the agency that oversees that process. It's at their discretion whether or not they would want to consider our local regulations as part of their decision to approve or deny the project.
And our indication so far has been that the CEC, California Energy Commission, has been pretty open to analyzing a project based on what they call the LORs, laws, ordinance, regulations, standards. And now that we have a ordinance that's adopted, they will reference that document in their processing of that permit. However, the site selection may still go forward on ag land, even though our ordinance doesn't allow that. And thus, I'm sorry, Christine,
Go ahead.
and thus the agricultural mitigation ordinance comes into play. So that 40 acres of prime ag land will be mitigated through that process. So that's another one of our local ordinances that they would have to adhere to.
Let's shift for a moment and talk about some of the community impacts on this type of infrastructure. We know that there's obviously a lot of concern around emergency response, fire protection, things like that. But what other type of infrastructure, I guess, utility type items should we be considering when we are crafting our own ordinances in terms of water usage or not, knowing apparently that we don't use water when when we have a fire problem, but also just any other type of electrical, like grids and any type of other infrastructure needs that would drain the community that we need to think about ahead of time when we're crafting ordinances, like stormwater drainage systems, monitoring from whatever the community standpoint is. And then, of course, the decommissioning. We talked about the decommissioning and like kind of the long-term infrastructure impacts, and what that contamination cleanup, even though it's built into the ordinance, that the company bringing it is the one to properly decommission it and clean it up and return it to its original state. But just what are those in the weeds a little bit, things that we need to consider for our ordinances when we're crafting?
Terrific question. What comes to, and Eric can jump in here as well, but what comes to mind for us was of concern was fire suppression water, because we're a rural county and we don't always have access to city services, right? Meaning city water that's under pressure. So we're dealing with wells. All right. How do you do fire suppression on a well? We'll have to figure that out. And that's part of, because there is still a need for water, regardless of not hitting the thermal runaway directly with water itself, but there still is a need for water, fire suppression water. But being on a well, it's a different ballgame. So there are pumps and systems that can be accommodated for that, storage tanks on property, et cetera. So we did take some measures to address that in our ordinance. Some of the other utility kinds of needs that we're seeing, and I'm sure many of us have seen it, especially a lot of our folks who are participating in the the Northeast, are data centers. Data centers are very similar facilities in many ways. and importantly, the water consumption associated with water or data centers is of particular importance. Whether it's a closed loop circulating system or whether it's actually a daily draw from wells or city services of water. That's of particular interest as well. Eric, any other particular thoughts on that
Totally.
question?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, to drive the point home, what the firefighters are doing with the water, if not putting it on the module on fire, they're spraying it on the surrounding modules so that they don't overheat and then go into thermal runaway themselves. So that's what they're spraying with the water. And some additional areas that we tried to address in terms of community impacts was also requiring a sealed layer between the modules and the ground, so that if there's a puncturing of any of these systems, or if that water that's put on the modules is contaminated with some kind of hazardous material, that water isn't then seeping into the groundwater, contaminating nearby agricultural sites. Another big area of concern is that as we're moving further and further into the generations of this technology, it's not necessarily the installation risk that you got to worry about. It's the long-term maintenance and operations risk that as these systems get older and older, systems get faulty, bits start to disconnect. And so really requiring some consistent regulation and checkups on those systems, and requiring licensed professionals to conduct those checkups and essentially put their license on the line, certifying those systems both at install, the start of commercial operation, and then throughout the life of the system. Those were some areas that we should try to make sure we're.
Thank you. And I know that this session is about local ordinances, but there are questions, and I too have them regarding the economic and the fiscal benefits, I guess, of having something like this, especially if you're pitching this to your decision makers and your community leaders. I know that you talked about community benefits agreements, but talk a little bit more about property tax revenues or any other, and I'm going to talk about other renewable energy integration. That's another question I have in a moment. But if we could just talk about what the economic benefits are to the community.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, yeah, as was discussed, I think the concept of, sales tax, property tax primarily with regards to a development project like this, but importantly, point of sales. I think that's really important. It's possible not to have a corporate office on that site and thus purchases of the equipment for that particular site would be made out of county. And we are stipulating that there be a point of sales inside of our county for those purchases, so that we do benefit from that sales tax. And then there's also the construction, jobs during the facility install. That would be of particular benefit with local hire, ideally, as well as ongoing operations. But it's really that the biggest benefit we saw in doing our research with other California counties who have permitted these projects is in the mitigation requirements of the ordinance. We did see that. We have a laundry list of unmet needs with regards to our county, and some of the first responders needs through equipment, the ability to communicate, radio interoperability. We had a laundry list of things that we felt like the developers could contribute to make our county whole financially, but also safer. And as a result of these projects, we really honed in on the idea that mitigation really is the one of the most significant methods in which to realize local benefit from these projects. Eric, you have other thoughts there?
Yeah, no, totally second Alan's position that mitigation, tying those local benefits to the impacts of the project, we found to be the most successful pathway. And just to put some numbers and kind of contextualize, so for that Corby project that is seeking approval through the state pathway in our county, it's on 40 acres of prime ag land. and is a 300 megawatt system, so can power several thousand homes all at one time. That represents a $385 million investment from the developer, which they estimate to yield about $70 million in local property revenue. So not all of that is going to the county. It's divided up among the local agencies. And then during construction, it creates around 200 construction jobs with, they estimate, around 5 long-term jobs for maintenance and surveillance of the system.
Thank you. Talk to us a little bit about having one of these battery storage systems and its relationship to enabling greater uses of other types of renewable energy, such as solar or wind energy. Is there a connection to it? Talk about that relationship.
Eric, you might have some good feedback there.
Totally. Yeah, so California is in a bit of a unique situation. We've got much more renewable energy as a proportion of the electricity on our grid than any other state. It's around
I love that for you.
It's nice, but it comes with its downsides. So it's around 35% for the average day. And that means that we are generating a ton of solar energy right around noon, and then the peak of our energy usage is actually closer to around 4 to 9 p.m. when everyone comes home and turns on their washing machines and turns on their TVs. So it's really important that we store some of that energy that's extra at noon, and then we provide it when we're actually turning on all those natural gas peaker plants in the afternoon, and instead using that solar energy instead. So it provides a huge arbitrage opportunity for developers to buy solar energy when it's cheap at noon and then sell it when it's expensive in the afternoon. And ultimately, like Alan mentioned in the presentation, it also helps our grid be much safer, more stable. We have less blackouts, we have less brownouts. So when there is a storm that knocks down some towers, we've got some backup energy to be able to tap into instead of relying on a more centralized system. So overall, energy storage, very, very important for the grid as a whole. And ultimately, what we're seeing a lot of too in California is individual customers deploying energy storage at their own facility. So this might be a household that, someone's on a medical machine that they can't have turn off in the middle of the night. And so they install a battery or a generator that provides coverage when the grid goes down. We're also seeing lots of businesses and industrial sites install their own batteries so that they can 100% guarantee they will have power for 48 hours or 72 hours to operate in case of a grid disaster. So we're seeing them deployed all across our grid here in California. And I think the statistic I saw was that in 2024, 65% of all of the battery energy storage in terms of capacity was installed in California. So really, we have some unique conditions here that lead to battery energy storage being particularly economic and productive for our grid.
Okay. This is a good question. Do you require decommissioning of other land uses in your ordinance? And to that, I'll also include, we talked about mitigation and maintenance and kind of the laundry list of things that the community needs, and this can potentially support that. Do you require that in other places? And if so or not, do applicants who are looking for sites, when they read your ordinance, do they take that into account, or is it just across the board? This is what is expected?
Yeah, interesting question. Again, Solano County is kind of a very interesting place. We have over 600 wind turbines in the county. Also, so we happen to be a high wind resource area in addition to Barstow, California. So we do have a decommissioning aspect to those wind turbines as well. So we ask for bonding and surety bonds up front to ensure that when those are decommissioned, that that site is restored to its natural state. And then the other one that comes to mind is we do have 7 surface mines in our county as well, where sand and gravel primarily are mined. And we do have reclamation plans through the State Mining and Reclamation Act that are required to restore those mines to their original conditions as well. So those were 2 precedent type of projects that we used to ensure a similar restoration with these BESS projects as well.
Thank you. Which the zoning districts that you allow for BESS systems, how did you determine, in your case, for your community, which districts were appropriate versus not appropriate. Or in, in your research in creating your ordinance, did you look to other communities? And again, is it fairly consistent across the board for which districts do and or are not allowed to hold such type of system?
Yeah, great question, Christine, and participants who suggest that. Yes, it is fairly standard. We found through our research and due diligence to allow these in manufacturing zones, which are, as technologies evolve, we are starting to see data centers and BESS storage applications where, many of our codes weren't written at the time that those technologies existed. So what is the most relevant zone district that something like that would be applicable in? Well, it happens to be manufacturing or industrial zone districts. That makes sense. Usually they're, somewhat sequestered from populations and isolated, if you will, on parcels. So that seemed to make sense with regards to the allowable use in those zone districts. And then you start to as Eric went through the sequence of our site selection, you could see, well, we want to preserve our ag lands, so those are not allowed. We want to, avoid sensitive receptors, so, homes and schools and businesses, et cetera, within close proximity. So we omitted those areas. So it really does make most sense that these become projects that are somewhat isolated. Until the battery energy systems incorporate some of those lower threat uses from thermal runaway. And it does appear that those technologies are coming. They're not here yet, but they do appear to be coming. And so our hope is that, these do become safer systems ultimately. But currently that lithium ion that you find in, many hybrid vehicles or, consumer toys, et cetera, they're volatile, and you can see it from, with regards to, flying on an airplane. They don't like to have those on the planes because of their, potential of thermal runaway, right? And so the idea is to isolate it as much as is feasible until those new technologies come online.
Thank you. A couple specific ordinance questions or comments. The first one is, do you require any visual buffering from the right-of-way and or adjacent incompatible land uses?
Eric, maybe you want to touch
Yeah.
on that one. I believe we did address that in the ordinance.
Yeah, so we initially started with a position of requiring full visual screening from any public right-of-ways or adjacent uses. And then in consultation with our first responders, they requested that they actually be able to see through that fence and into the facility as they drive by. So primarily law enforcement wanted to be able to check up on these systems. There's a lot of copper with all the electric infrastructure here, so they wanted to be able to make sure that there was nobody in the systems where they shouldn't be. So we are now requiring, still some kind of visual screening, but that ultimately that the fence is transparent and you can see through it. From the public right of way there. So we ultimately found a middle ground there where there's screening where appropriate, but that it's still visible for law enforcement that drive by.
Great. Thank you. Talk a little bit about noise and vibration and whether that's addressed specifically in the ordinance.
We didn't.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, we just deferred to our standard county requirements for noise and vibration studies and impacts and decibel caps. So we did not create any special requirements for these systems. So
yeah, and what I would say on that is what we've done with other projects, the way that we've conditioned those on noise is we do have a limit of 65 dBA at the property line. And so we ask for, and put the onus on the applicants to record sounds at their property line. And if we do receive a complaint, that we can draw on those logs and verify whether there was or was not an issue with a project exceeding the 65 dBA at the property line. And just for context, 65 dBA is you and I having conversations right now. It's a person-to-person conversation, basically at the property line.
Thank you. I'm pulling my screen up again to a specific slide because let's talk about setbacks for a minute. We got a couple of clarification questions there. And the first one is generally going over again how the setbacks were determined, but specifically there's a couple specific questions. And if you want to go ahead and get started, just generally again going over how the setbacks were determined.
Yeah, Eric, you want to take a crack?
Yeah, totally. So I saw one question related to how we reached the 300-foot number from sensitive
Oh, yeah,
receptors.
that's one of the specific ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start with that one.
Okay.
So for that, we consulted with a former fire chief who is now working as a consultant on permitting these systems. And in his experience, he said that 300 feet was more than enough space to operate safely without any protective equipment. So that was the one clear number that we heard from an authoritative source, that it was safe. In the past, historically, we've seen evacuations with a much wider radius, up to even half a mile away from these thermal runaway sites. But we view that more as a precaution from first responders, and that was a reasonable enough distance from sensitive receptors. And sensitive receptors are defined in state law, and essentially we've got to assume that any occupied resident or residence or business has some kind of immunocompromised person in it. Which would define them as a sensitive receptor. And then that 100-foot property line was developed in consultation with our local first responders. So we had one consolidated meeting bringing in all the local law enforcement and fire departments and fire protection districts, and they all agreed that 100 feet was enough space to be able to operate safely from that public right-of-way. So being able to set up a incident command station, pull the trucks up there, and then be able to respond appropriately within that 100-foot setback. The 50-foot rear setbacks from the rear and the side of the property lines, that was ultimately to allow more space to develop the system, but still leave enough space from associated adjacent properties. And the 30-foot wide fire access road is included within those setbacks, so it doesn't add on top of them, but rather it's within the 50 or 100-foot or 300-foot setback. And that is really just to allow the fire trucks to be able to drive right up as close as they need to those modules, to be able to respond to a thermal runaway incident. And for the no thermal runaway risk systems, we required a 20-foot setback, which is above the 10-foot state requirement. And that was primarily based on minimizing impacts to nearby and associated property. So not necessarily based on a risk of thermal runaway.
Thank you. With these facilities limited to a few zones, how do you address the Gentile line connecting the facility to the grid? And to that, there was another question that's related, and that is having utility providers often need to provide electric load as close to the end user as possible. So just kind of talking about if you only have a few zones and that you allow this in, how do you account or who accounts for getting it to the end user or getting it tied into a system that, might be out of the way? And
It's a great question, Christine, and thank you for that. Eric's going to have some thoughts on this one too. So, what we found, and it's to an earlier question too about some of the other infrastructure that might parlay into a project like this, substations. These projects want to locate near substations. And we happen to have a very attractive substation in our county that is a kind of a terminus, or actually it's a crossroads, if you will, of some major systems that Eric can elaborate on. And so all the applications that we've seen in interest in our county so far is to locate near these substations for the interconnection issues. What we did find is that they do have the ability to locate farther away, but it's at a higher cost. And so the closer to the substations, the better. For instance, we also have a new substation application in Solano County coming soon. It's in the next couple of years. And we are trying to gear up for that by possibly through our general plan update, zoning around that substation to allow for these projects to happen by setting off sensitive receptors through that zoning. And so we're looking to, it's very rare that these come online, these projects once every decade, perhaps. And so it's our opportunity to get ahead of it. This particular substation where this project's near, did not do that. Historically, nobody saw this technology coming or the need for doing such. And so there are quite a few homes within close proximity to this substation where this is particularly attractive. Eric, you have some thoughts there?
Yeah, and in terms of, kind of who's responsible for that gen-tie connection, it's almost always the same developer of the battery system. So they're building both the large battery and then however that's connecting into the grid. Like Alan mentioned, oftentimes, more frequently than not, it's a substation. And the reason that they want to connect into that substation is essentially the number of smaller grids that they can sell into with their battery system. So if you're just connected to one transmission line, you're only able to sell to the areas connected to that one transmission line, as opposed to if you're connecting into a substation connected to 8 different transmission lines, you can sell into 8 of those different transmission lines based on who needs it the most. So it's most economical for them to connect into a substation, and the more critical that substation is, the more interconnections that substation has, the more opportunities there are for the battery to make a buck on selling expensive electricity. And so, yeah, it's ultimately the developer that's responsible for building and permitting that. We permit that gen-tie not as part of the battery system, but as utility infrastructure, either inside or outside the right-of-way. So we've got a separate permitting pathway for that, really the same as any other transmission lines being built within our county here. So we approach those as 2 separate systems, although recognizing that any battery system that's going to be built is going to have a gen-tie into the transmission grid. And I'll note also quickly that you're really only going to see these systems tie into the high voltage transmission line. So that's the big metal towers that you see. That's the grid that they're going to want to connect into. It's not the smaller neighborhood grid that's connecting into your house that they want to connect into. They got to get through a substation to drop down the voltage before they sell it to the end user. So ultimately, they don't need to site themselves near end users that are using a lot of electricity. They need to site near the grid infrastructure that's going to allow them to sell to as many users as possible. And like Alan said, they want to be as close to that substation as possible, but it costs them about $1 million a mile to build that high voltage transmission line. So technically it's feasible, but it hurts the project economics to build even half a mile or 3 miles away from a substation.
Wow. Okay. Inspections. Who does site inspections during construction, after decommission, maintenance? Does California inspection certification require some type of specific training just for this? How do we keep tabs on it? Because I think across the board, we can all pretty much agree that the biggest deterrent to this is just the general safety of the whole thing. And so obviously inspections are important.
Yeah. Eric, thoughts on that one?
Yeah, totally. So there's the standard, kind of county site inspection process that they would need to go through. They get their building permit. We would send our staff out there as well. But we've also included some requirements that are above and beyond that for these systems in particular. So we require that fire protection engineers inspect and approve both the battery storage system itself, the sprinklers that are installed, the venting equipment that is installed to prevent thermal runaway, really any system that we can get them to certify and kind of put their license on the line, we require them to get certified. And that's also a requirement within the California Fire Code that those licensed fire protection engineers go through and inspect that. But we went a little bit above and beyond the Fire Code in terms of what specifically we require to be inspected and approved by fire protection engineers.
Thank you. Is there any type of risk assessment process that communities can evaluate to identify their potential risk on having a facility in their community? Additionally, as water is potentially more hazardous during an emergency, or how much flood risk related to assessment is being done during the planning and permitting phase?
That's a great question. Eric, maybe you can speak to the flood zone elevation criteria that we had in the ordinance as well.
Yeah, so we're requiring that any systems that are built within a FEMA designated floodplain have the pad that the batteries are built on be raised at least 3 feet above that floodplain or that base flood elevation level. So we're requiring that the pad be raised if it's within that flood zone. Yeah, did you want to elaborate on the other ones, or should I?
You can try that there, Eric, if you would.
Yeah. Um, yeah, in addition to that, we also require that the systems be elevated above. We also are requiring the sealant between the batteries themselves and the ground, so that if there's any leakage, that the groundwater is protected. And that's primarily in terms of water and additional exposures. Like Alan mentioned, we're requiring that either fire suppression water be located on site or that it be connected through some sort of city water service.
Yeah, and with regards to like kind of a pre-analysis of these systems, it's interesting because, perhaps people in the industry might have a certain opinion about their safety. Third-party consultants who don't have a dog in the fight, if you will, might be best to, give a municipality a honest and fair opinion about what a system looks like, or could look like, or what the flags are. That tends to be kind of a third party review, if you will, tends to be perhaps the best way to get a kind of an honest and fair assessment of what impacts could come along with a system like that, to inform, a municipality make a wise decision on these.
Yeah, and our language, like Alan said, is very broad. It just requires that any risks and impacts be addressed by that third party assessment. I think the one thing that I would point to in particular that we found to be helpful is the plume modeling, which is essentially where the plume of the smoke is modeled. Certain concentrations of toxic materials are estimated at certain distances away from the fire. It's important to note that these plume models are just a snapshot based on prevailing winds, what's most likely to happen in case of thermal runaway, not necessarily going to represent what actually happens in case of thermal runaway, but we've relied on those specific studies as important elements in our risk assessment, and in particular, what the risk to Travis Air Force Base will look like.
Thank you. We have a couple people commenting about the 100-year flood and also looking at floodplains, including the 500-year floods, and whether that might be a better assessment parameter. Just a couple of comments
It could very well
regarding
be,
that.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, you're right. It could very well be depending on, the municipality it's located in,
Mhm.
right? We have a pretty predictable flood level in our county with regards to, rising sea levels, rivers, creeks that run through the county.
Mhm.
But there are, East Coast, locations that may be subject to the 500-year flood more frequently than we would be.
Right.
But you have to understand that these battery systems do not do good in salt water or fresh water either. They are prone to thermal runaway. I believe that's the case, Eric, if I'm not mistaken.
Talk more about that.
Yeah,
I've seen Teslas driving on the beach that are in flames, that kind of thing, and they just generally don't mix with water.
yeah, and technically they should be sealed, right? Both to be able to protect things from coming inside to the outside and vice versa. But yeah, that's part of the inspection that we're requiring, is that make sure that those seals are tight. So if there is water touching, makes it above that 3 foot pad, then ideally it won't puncture into those batteries. But yeah, if the electronics are exposed, there's a risk of.
Okay. And is there a difference between when you said fresh water, is there a difference between that and like salt water or just water in general?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think saltwater intrusion can trigger a failure.
Okay.
At least that's the way I've seen it. But I would imagine freshwater would do the same.
Okay. Okay. Um, two quick, and I'll tell you what, we had over 50 questions. So I'm sorry if your question did not get answered. We are doing our best here, and we have been going. I'm tired. I need a nap after this. We keep going. So let's just finish off strong here with two last questions. One, in the ordinance, let's just talk about the size required or not required. Is there a minimum or maximum within the ordinance in terms of what you can and cannot have?
Yeah, so there's really two different ways that we're looking at these systems and trying to define them. So once again, it's front of the meter versus behind the meter. Anything behind the meter is not regulated by this ordinance. So even if a factory wants to build a really big battery just for their factory, it's not regulated by our ordinance, just the California Fire Code. But the minimum threshold that we put on the front of the meter systems was 1 megawatt of nameplate capacity. So that's how much energy can be put out at one time. So if anything is smaller than 1 megawatt, it's technically not regulated, but that's about the size of a car battery. So we don't expect any developers to be building systems that small serving the entire grid.
Okay, good. Last question, and then I have some wrap up things, so don't leave. How about underground storage? Will that be a viable option for this type of system? Will we be seeing that in the future?
Well, that's interesting. Eric, do you have any intel on that?
I have not.
I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, the types of underground storage I've seen is more so like you store air underground in old natural gas wells, you pump that air down, and then as you release it, it releases energy. So it's not necessarily the types of battery energy storage that we've seen, but there are some emerging technologies in terms of the energy storage space broadly, where you can pump air or water into a pressurized underground system, and the gravity pushes it back out, releasing energy.
Mm.
We don't regulate those systems in this ordinance.
Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. This was a great conversation. I learned a lot. I hope I captured well the majority of our questions here in our Q&A. A couple quick things. One, yes, we're recording this session. I will have it posted up onto our YouTube channel on Monday, youtube.com/planningwebcast. Don't forget to log those CM credits, including we're counting this as an SNR credit as well if you need that. On-demand sessions are available on our website. You can also register for upcoming sessions on our website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And lastly, if you go over into the chat, you'll see that I included the email for contacting the County Planning Division. If you're interested in joining or you have questions, comments, queries, Adam's your guy. So head over there and email them. Okay,
Yeah,
I
and
think
we're
that's
happy
it.
to field any additional questions
Great.
anybody
And
has
yeah,
that
if you want,
wasn't
you can
answered.
reach out to Adam or you can reach out to us and we can forward it on to our panelists and those can get answered for you. So that's it. And hey, what a good way to end 2025. I am impressed. And for those that are still on the line, I did some mathing and we had over 12,500 attendees join our webinars this year alone.
Wow, good for you. Good for you.
It was just a great year. So thanks everyone for being here and for continuing to fight the good fight. And everyone have a great weekend. Have a great rest of your 2025. And we're going to hit the ground running in 26 here. So thanks everybody. Have a good one.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.